There's one person that's supposed to make sure that what is in the gun is right and that what's wrong is not in the gun. One person has that responsibility to maintain the gun. And
what is the actor's responsibility?
I guess that's a tough question, because the actor's responsibility going this day forward is very different than it was the day before that. Yeah, now I can't. First of all, I can't imagine I'd ever do a movie that had a gun in it again. And I can't. When you say what is the actor's responsibility, the actor's responsibility is to do what the prop armorer tells him to do.
When this shooting first happened, I came out and defended Alec Baldwin. I mean, I didn't defend him, but I chastised people like Donald Trump Jr. and Candace Owens that I thought were being ruthless in their attacks at him. I mean, Donald Trump Jr. was selling shirts that said, "Guns don't kill people, Alec Baldwin kills people." I thought they were just crappy. I still think that they're crappy. But this interview was such a dumb idea. Like, when I found that he was doing the interview, I was like, why in the world would he do this? There's a criminal investigation going on. There's a bunch of civil litigation happening. I mean, certainly all of his lawyers are saying, run for the hills, don't sit down for this interview. But he did it. And after watching it, I think there are three things you can take away, or maybe three things to think about as it relates to the events of that day and Alec. The first is, this is such a shining example of what happens when somebody's ego gets the best of them. I don't know if Alec is diagnosable as a narcissist, but he definitely displays some of those characteristics, right? If you have your full legal team telling you, don't have this conversation, but you have the arrogance, you've deluded yourself into thinking that you are competent enough, savvy enough, smart enough to have this discussion and not make a mistake, that tells you something about your ego, right? This only put him at risk, all because he wanted to be viewed positively. At the start of the interview, he says, look, people were criticizing me, and people that I liked were criticizing me, and people that I didn't like were criticizing me, and I had to have this conversation. He acknowledged that this would move through the courts pretty quickly. By February or March, the public would have known. It would have been a much more appropriate time for him to come out, but Alec couldn't deal with the distress, the narcissistic injury that comes from the public scrutiny. And so he has this conversation. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think it's worth talking about the moments in the video or the interview in which he cried. I want to first say it's impossible for me to look at someone and know with certainty whether or not their tears are real or not real. To me, they felt controlled. He's acting like he is being overcome by grief, and yet they were very short tears, and then he resumed the conversation in a very productive way very quickly.
The Ukrainian-born cinematographer quickly gelled with Baldwin.
The people who watched The Daily said that her work was beautiful. She was someone who was loved by everyone who worked with and liked by everyone who worked with and admired. Sorry. But admired by everybody who worked with her.
Compare that, for example, to the tears you saw with Kyle Rittenhouse when he was talking about the shootings he experienced.
And there were three people right there.
Take a deep breath, Kyle.
That's what I... That's what I run.
We're going to just take time for our break.
Now, these are two very different examples, and you can't say that everybody has to cry in the same way. It just felt like, to be honest, Alec's crying felt It was too pretty, right? There wasn't the ugly crying. It ended too shortly. And the last thing is, it happened at odd moments. At the start of it, when he first started talking about Halyna, he cried. I thought he cried appropriately. And then he cried later on when he was talking about how he loved making movies, and he was talking about all of the impressive movies he's been in and sort of the loss of that love, and teared up there. So let's just go, okay, let's just say those are genuine and appropriate. I thought it was odd then that later on when he was talking about Halyna's child and meeting with her husband, that didn't trigger the tears. And it was a little bit as if he had lost focus on the fact that he was to show emotion, right? So I don't totally buy it, but I want to be super clear to say that it doesn't really matter. You can't expect someone to emote and show their genuine emotions on an ABC interview with millions of people watching. He may have been acting here but feeling incredible grief outside of this interview. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about, but it's not representative of what his genuine emotion may or may not be. And the last thing, maybe the most important thing I learned, was that Alec has found a way to take zero responsibility for this. I mean, he denied everything. Yes, he was an executive producer, but just a creative producer. He just helped with casting. And he knows you would never point a gun at someone unless it's the cinematographer. And then he goes into great detail describing how this woman who he shot told him to point the gun at her, which may have been true. But my thought was, Alec, you're going on national television and describing how this woman who is now dead instructed this horrible thing. He's blaming her for it happening. And I just thought it's just not a great look. And then at the end, when George asked him, I thought a great question, which was, what's the actor's responsibility? And he goes, just to do what I'm told, right? He's just a tool and can't possibly take any blame. I just thought it was a lame response. I would have, oh my God, wait. And he said he didn't pull the trigger. And I'm going like, that seems really unlikely. And so I was looking at different gun experts talking about it. Turns out no one thinks that's possible. There's sort of two ways a gun goes off. One is you cock it and pull the trigger, or you pull the trigger and cock it and let go of the trigger. Either way, his finger's on the trigger. The gun doesn't just go off without touching the trigger. So now, it's possible that Alec didn't know that he pulled the trigger and it was an accident, very viable. I'm not saying that he's a bad guy or that we should be attacking him differently. I just thought that the way he showed up on this interview was lame. It did nothing but, in my opinion, hurt his case in court. But more than that, I think in his eyes, hurt the way he's viewed by the public. So I'm dying to know what you think. Please leave your thoughts and comments below. And if you're interested, I did a video, a sort of initial reaction video when this first happened, and I'll link it right here. And if you want to like and subscribe, which you should, click over here.